My name is Deborah Ladd. I am the Assistant Director of the Webster Groves Public Library. We have been privileged to host this event for 5 or 6 times, and it is always wonderful. I know you will have a great time tonight. Well, here's Eamon Wall to introduce our speakers and musicians.
Good evening, everybody. Fáilte, Gwina Ushla. It's wonderful to have this event here. When we put together events, we always worry, will anybody show up? But the candles that we lit and everything, and the rosaries that we said must have been heard this time. So, as Debbie said, this is about the 5th or 6th year we've hosted this event here at the library. Tonight's event is a celebration of our Irish culture and heritage. As you know, one of Ireland's and Irish America's great gifts to the world is our rich, vibrant, and resonant culture. Songs, poems, stories, tunes, speeches, arguments, and the rest. As Pete Hamill famously said, there was no elegance to American speech until the Irish came here. So this event is a much bigger event than usual, and so before I just explain it a little bit, I just want to thank our sponsors who have made this event possible. And tomorrow at the Symposium part at the Missouri Historical Society, we will thank our sponsors more formally. But tonight, let me just call them out to you. The Smurfit-Stone Professorship in Irish Studies at UMSL, UMSL Global, Webster Groves Public Library, the Friends of the Webster Groves Public Library, the Ancient Order of Hibernians, the Ladies' Ancient Order of Hibernians, St. Louis Irish Arts, and New Hibernia Review, Centre for Irish Studies at the University of St. Thomas in Minnesota, and the UMSL 60th Committee. This year we are celebrating the 60th anniversary of UMSL, so that's one of the reasons why our program is a little different and a little bit more ambitious. I'll also remind you that there's a retail aspect to this evening. The Novel Neighbour is outside, so if you'd like to buy the books of Charles Fanning and of Terence Winch and of Alice McDermott, the books are for sale outside. It's not that many shopping days to Christmas, so you might consider buying them. And of course, the authors will be happy to sign the books for you. So, just to give you a little bit of feedback, for a number of years we've been co-hosting a salon of Irish music, song, spoken word with Webster Public Library and the Friends of Webster Public Library. This evening's event is different. It is both a salon and it's the first part of a symposium in honour of Charlie Fanning. And Charlie Fanning lives here in Webster Groves, and he is the great scholar of Irish America, of its literature and its history. So we are privileged to have him here in our midst. And of course, part of the reason why it's in the library, that this is not only our library, but it's also Charlie's library. So we are thrilled to have him here. And so we will also have the event tomorrow in the Missouri History Museum. So please feel free to join us then. So I'm not going to do introductions much for everybody. I put the sheets, sheets of the bios are on your seats. It's much more fun to listen to the performers rather than to listen to me. But the program we will have music, and then we will have an interview with Charlie Fanning, then we will have a reading from Terence Winch, then we'll have a break, then we'll have music, then we'll have a reading from Alice McDermott, and then we'll end with a couple of tunes from our musicians. So I was thinking that this evening is a little bit like one of those events that we noticed recently there was a great won at the Newport Folk Festival for Joni Mitchell. So this is a kind of, you know, when all of her great admirers came to the one place to, you know, to hear her perform and to honour her. So we're going to start with Eileen Gannon and Robert Ryan. So please, a big welcome.
Thank you. It's so nice to see everyone. It's like St. Patrick's Day all over. I'm going to continue on now with a piece that was written in the year 1661 by a harper composer named Thomas Connell, and it is in honor of his patron, Lady Ivy.
Thank you very much. We are going to jump forward from the 1660s into what we call the new Irish music. So this would be music that's from the 1960s. So we've jumped forward 3 centuries, but we're not quite all the way into the present because that's part of the tradition. So these Lady Ivy, as you can hear, was not a dance piece. It's a piece that was composed for the harp, and it would have been for people to listen to only, whereas a lot of the music, most of the music, in fact, that we play is actually part of the dancing tradition. There's no real way of understanding Irish music without understanding the role of the songs and the dancing. It's all very much part and parcel of the same package. So we'll continue with a few polkas here, a few dance tunes.
if you read the bios, you get more information about them, and you realize that these are two world-class musicians who are living here in St. Louis, and St. Louis is a hotbed of traditional Irish music. And so thank you so much. We'll have two more sets of music. So the next part of the program then is James Silas Rogers, one of the great Irish-American essayists, is going to interview Charles Fanning. So if we just turn the chairs around and let's move her.
Wait, they're gonna have these chairs.
You want to sit with you?
If we can be heard, share.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we can be heard. All right. Okay.
Okay.
Wasn't one of the great harpers Charles Fanning at the Belfast Harp Festival? You may want to.
He absolutely does.
Yeah, so it may. These ancestral urges may overtake you, Charlie. You may want to start playing the harp.
Yes, he won.
He won the Belfast.
1792, yeah.
Settling in here.
Charlie
taking my
Fanning,
question.
yeah.
Very good.
True.
Well, this is.
Since we're honoring Charlie this week, and it'd be a good idea for those of you who don't know him to hear him speak and to get in touch with Chile. Go ahead, Jim.
Okay, sure. And what an honor it is for me to be here with Charlie. I met Charlie at the first Irish conference I ever attended. That was in October of 1980, 43 years ago. As Sam Goldwyn is reputed to have said, we've all passed a lot of water since then. And at that point, Charlie was just setting out on the magisterial Irish Voice in America project. It was just beginning at then. You know, I've stayed in touch with Charlie. It was providential that I got to meet him then, and I consider myself his nearly bankrupt heir. That Charlie done so much to. John L. Sullivan said once that you could not write the history of Boston without mentioning the. Trying to write the history of Boston without mentioning the Sullivans would be like writing the Bible without mentioning God, and writing Irish American literature without mentioning Charlie Fanning would be equally difficult. But every intellectual journey begins somewhere, and you spent your lifetime an accomplished scholar, spent your lifetime in the world of words and the life of the mind, the world of literature and books. But bird watchers have a useful idea. Bird watchers talk about a spark bird, the bird that sets them out on a lifetime of birding, sets them out the one that they see that bird, and from then on, they're kind of hooked. What were some of the books or authors who set you off on your intellectual adventure?
Well, I'd have to back up a little bit to put myself in historical context here. I was born and raised in a small town south of Boston, Norwood. It wasn't a suburb, it was its own separate place with tanneries, printing houses, an ink mill, and it was a place where a lot of Irish immigrants came in the 19th and then again in the 20th century. There was especially an immigration from South Connemara of Irish speakers from the 1920s on through. And our claim to fame in terms of the Irish language, I heard it on the streets as a kid. And there was a small pub we called it the Irish Heaven. It did not have a sign. It's on a side street, but we could walk up to it and you could hear Irish being spoken inside. And that was kind of the beginning of my interest in this, you know.
Mm-hmm.
My background was part Irish, part German, part old line Yankee, always at each other's throats, you know. And, more of it was Irish. But in terms of the literary tradition, probably the greatest 20th century novelist in the Irish language, Moitin O'Kane, he had relatives in Norwood, and he came there often, and he hung out at the Irish Heaven. The Norwood and its environs made its way into his great novel, Craigh Killa, Churchyard Clay, which remains probably the greatest modernist novel in the Irish language. So that's the beginning of it. And then it comes to the fact that public education, when I was coming up, was quite a remarkable thing. I had great teachers all the way through, and many of them were women. Most of them were women. They were brilliant. They were thwarted in other sorts of occupations, I would say, in a lot of ways. And so my French teacher in high school was a Radcliffe graduate who had studied at the Sorbonne. My English teacher was the daughter of Irish immigrants, Elizabeth O'Sullivan, daughter of Irish immigrants from coastal Maine, who would come over, an Irish-speaking migration from County Kerry, the O'Sullivans, and that got into the way she taught as well. So I had this kind of grounding, kind of ground sense in the importance of things Irish. The first book that I recall as having really intrigued me enough that I wanted to read it over again was recommended to me by the children's librarian at the Norwood Public Library, Dorothy Shoemaker, who was also a wonderful person. She let me into they called it the intermediate room. Before I was old enough. You had to be in 5th grade to get in there, you know. I was only in 3rd, but she let me in and she recommended things. I mean, the book she recommended that I recall the most was Carl Sandburg's Rutabaga Tales. I don't know if anyone knows that or remembers that. Yeah, some do. Yeah. It's a very interesting, a very strange book. It's full of little stories that he made up. The names that he made up are really remarkable and crazy. And the stories themselves, they begin kind of rooted in the Midwest, but then they go out to different sorts of places, mystical, magical places, and so on. So that book, which Ms. Shoemaker thought I would like, and that I did like, introduced me to the dimension of writing that I guess has really stuck with me.
I'd say it did, absolutely. That's wonderful. That's great. Your reputation, I suppose, will always rest on that magisterial book, The Irish Voice in America. What was the spark for that expedition? The way I mean, it really is incredible with the trawl that Charlie made of long forgotten, and some not forgotten, some well known but never really understood as Irish books. It is incredible. Your idea of fun was going blind to the microfilm reader, I suppose. But what was the spark for that incredible journey of writing the Irish, an ambitious, life-consuming project, 200 years of neglected ethnic writing? What prompted that?
First, I'd have to say I had the heartiest of welcomers into the Irish studies field. I was so fortunate to know right out of college John Kelleher, who was a gigantic figure in Irish studies, in Irish history and literature, from the earliest to the latest. And he encouraged me. And then he introduced me to Thomas N. Brown, who was chair of the history department at UMass Boston, a wonderful scholar and a wonderful man who encouraged me to, he helped me find my dissertation, which was on late 19th century Chicago Irish writer Finlay Peter Dunn, who created Mr. Dooley, Mr. Martin Dooley, a bartender philosopher, in newspaper columns that would come out once a week in the Chicago Evening Post all through the 1890s. Tom said to me, I think there are more of these Dooley columns than were ever collected in books, and you should go out and find them. So I went out to Chicago, and I spent 4 months turning the crank of the microfilm readers, and I found 300 of these pieces. And the best ones were better than any of the things he put in books, because he thought that the stuff in books had more national interest. He got very famous for writing about the Spanish-American War, and he got national syndication, moved to New York, and became a really important figure in American culture from 1900 to the First World War. But the earlier stuff, these are 1,000-word columns, which he turned out once a week for the Saturday Evening Post. In them, you get the Irish community. Bridgeport on the south side of Chicago, the Irish immigrant community. It comes vividly alive in the anecdotes that he tells in these columns, and they are just beautiful too. They're just gorgeously written, with just a touch of a brogue, but nothing that would bother anybody. Anyone would pick it up and read it. So that became and so Tom having sent me out there, that became my dissertation subject, and that was my introduction to the Irish in America, in terms of writing about it. Then it occurred to me, and it occurred to other people too, that there had to be a tradition. There had to be Irish-American writing in the 19th century. Why wouldn't there be? They came mostly knowing English. They were articulate. They came out of a literary tradition, a very powerful literary tradition that went back to the monks in the years 400, 800, and so on. So why wouldn't it be there? It just had to have been somehow buried. So I started looking, and lo and behold, there it was. I had access to a couple of really good libraries, and I would go, in the early stages, I would go to the library, the Widener Library at Harvard, and I'd go to the Macs and O's in fiction. And I'd started looking, down the lines, and here were all these novels. There were hundreds of them. And lo and behold, that was the beginning. And I sort of went on from there with much encouragement all along the way, from Tom Brown, from John Kelleher. I have to say that one of the two or three people most important to me in the early stages on through, one of my mentors is here tonight, and that's Blanche Toonville, who as a historian of the 1848 Rising and so on, and a university teacher and administrator, was very encouraging to me when I needed it the most as well. So it's lovely to see Blanche here and Joe.
And you're very gracious to thank all those people. Did you ever get discouraged? Did you ever think you might have been headed for a dead end, or did people try to discourage you? There was sort of an entrenched anti-Anglo superiority in the academy. Did people try to discourage you?
Yeah, no, not really. Partly it had to do with the fact that I was an English major as an undergrad, but I didn't do very much with Irish literature. And by the time I had finished doing that, and I tried a little bit of graduate work in English as well, I realized that I could not sustain an interest in the Anglophone literary tradition, England and America and so on. It just wasn't going to do it for me. Also, I didn't think that literary criticism per se was, I wouldn't say not worth pursuing, but not as worth pursuing as what you could use literature for, or what other things literature could do. Mm-hmm. And this matched up with a movement, American Studies, which was just starting to go strong in the late 1960s. And I was able to get into a graduate program in American Studies at the University of Pennsylvania. And so then the people who encouraged me from there, their interest was in how, and this became my interest as well, how literature and history interacted, mm-hmm. how one tells us about the other. And so with that sort of encouragement, and that continued through, I managed to avoid the possibly negative spin given to what I was doing by traditional literary scholars.
It should also be said that one of the many virtues of your work is you're jargon-free. You didn't go down the road of critical, high criticism, and your work is really masterfully lucid. So well done in that regard. Not all of the work that I published in my day, that could be said. So one question that always interests me as working in Irish America is, how do you handle the question of definition? Why is someone an Irish American writer and someone else is not? You specifically say Flannery O'Connor is one you leave off of your big study. one of your main concerns has been the Irish-American engagement with the larger culture. But what are you talking about? Are you talking about Irish-Americans writing to the larger culture, or how do you handle the definition, is my question.
Well, that's a tough one.
Well, I didn't think of that.
I think, to me, the idea, the definition of what I was going to find and write about was content-driven. It has to be by people who have the background, but who then use it and seek to understand it. So that Flannery O'Connor, she's an Irish background, but she's a Southern writer, and she doesn't engage with the immigrant, the ethnic experience, so I would leave her out. This was an exercise in examining the self-definition through literature of this group of people. Mm-hmm. So it's basically just entirely and very simplistically content-driven. Mm-hmm. These writers had to had an Irish background and been somehow in their fiction engaged with what that meant.
And it was important to have that Irish background. There's an effort to, for instance, to make Huck Finn into an Irish American. His name is Finn. Why wasn't he an Irish American? But he never entered the threshold of your concern for those reasons. No. Well, I just wanted. It's a good book all the same.
The book would have been 3 times as long.
Well, yeah, you can't. Really, and some of the, I've read some of the work that Charlie had to sift through, and it is penitential to read those 19th century Catholic novels. They were just so didactic and so, it was really, but it was also, and there was also kind of a, literature is sort of a participatory sport for the Irish of that time, wasn't it? The people, there were so many writers. Every town had its literature.
It's true, yeah, they were. In terms of the penitential aspect, I do often think that I've knocked several hundred years off purgatory.
Millions of years.
By dealing with some of these 19th century writers. But the important thing is, and this is where the American studies and the interdisciplinary idea comes in, even if they are, I call it literature, practical literature for immigrants. These books a lot of them were designed to be read by people coming over and to instruct them how to get along in this place, what the pitfalls would be and so on, and then it's dramatized in the characters. And yet, even if the writing is turgid, which it sometimes is, and the plotting is Manichaean, and you know how it's going to go, you know who's going to win and who's going to lose. The thing about these books is that they are full of stuff. They are full of materials for the historian, even when it's not you're not driven to read it. For literary purposes, it's beautiful in that it's you get stuff here that you don't get anywhere else. What was it like to live in a tenement, in a flat? You know, what was in there? What was and these writers they have all of that, you know. And what did people eat? What was work like? Leisure activities, who did music, and how did they do it, and so on. All of that is in there, and so with the historian's lens, it's all to be appreciated. There's good stuff in there for everybody.
Yeah, we're at risk of talking too much about the 19th century, but your work continues into the 20th century. It's 2 centuries, 250 years of Irish-American writing. You've said that the most important contribution, in your opinion, is what you call the twin cycle of Irish-American literature. Can you briefly describe what you mean by the twin cycle?
Well, I can actually. I thought this might be coming. and I made a few notes.
I was warned you would ask me that.
Because I hadn't looked at this book in a long time. But what I found was that there were 3 distinctive generations, literate generations in 18th and 19th century American Irish writing. The first generation is from the late 18th century to the famine time of 1845 or so. And lo and behold, and this was one of the most rewarding things that I found, there is a lot of satire and parody in the earliest material. Sophistication, self-confidence, the ability to laugh at oneself as an immigrant, the ability to laugh at the stereotypes of oneself that the Native Americans are putting on you. Great fun to find this stuff, and that's up to the famine. That's a generation of writers. And then the second generation is the famine generation, people who were immigrants themselves and then started to write in the States when they got over here, famine immigrants, people fleeing the Great Hunger. And the writing here goes from 1845 or so to about 1880. And this is, these are the novels we're talking about. These are the didactic novels, the novels that are instruction manuals, how to make the transition. Full bore didacticism makes a lot of turgid prose, but as I said, there's very rich historical material in there. The third generation, 1880 to World War I, contains Irish-American contributors to the debate between romance and realism, which was a big thing in the late 19th century. Followers of romance seized on the so-called Celtic twilight of the 1890s and so on. This allowed them to talk about things Irish that didn't have to do with living in cold water flats and working back-breaking pick and shovel jobs. And so you had a whole cadre of writers coming up who play on this, and this is Irishness for them, Irish-American writing for them. Just one example of this. The novel Darby O'Gill and the Little People appeared in 1904, and it was very popular. You might know it through the Disneyfication, one of Sean Connery's first starring role. He said, this was one way to go, a way to be Irish without paying attention to life on the ground. At the same time, in this third generation, you had realists, people focused on reality, contributing first to the local color movement in American literature in the 1890s and following. Some really fine writers, a story here, maybe a novel there, pretty much up until World War I. And that's the 19th century, that rhythm of three generations. Then there's a hiatus, a lost generation, and it was partly the climate, the cultural climate. The anti-immigrant movement took off in the 90s, culminated in slurs against hyphenated Americans, and then during World War I, and it was codified in the Immigration Exclusion Acts of 1924. Also, the view from Ireland got cloudy as well. The revolution of 16 to 21, with its tragic denouement, the treaty that satisfied nobody, the Civil War, so on. There was terrible disillusionment in Irish America as well, and I think that drained the life out of our Irish America as a literary source. Then it comes back again in the 30s. A group of writers, regional realists, like all of them, they're from all over. Fictional reports coming in from every place in America where there are Irish communities. And here, the key progenitor is my literary hero, J.T. Farrell, with Studs Lonergan, Young Lonergan, A Boyhood in Chicago Streets, his novel of 1932, begins his lifelong commitment to creating the lives and minds of ordinary Irish urban Chicagoans. And then the continued work from there feeds finally from into what we have what we've had since then, writers choosing to mine this ethnic strain and traits and stories down to the present. So that's the sense of what I found. You know, the three generation 19th century, and then the resurgence after the Irish in the 20th, and on from there.
Okay.
End of lecture.
Well, but that's not the end of the lecture. But I mean, I think the end of your lecture. He anticipated that question, so he came loaded for bear. He was, but
I don't think I could have remembered it if I.
But I think it's, I think the really important point that you make is that Irish American writing, Irish American literature never has been static. It's been evolving and adaptive, and as such, it has something to say to other immigrant populations and other ethnic identities. I think I'm mindful of time, Charlie. Believe it or not, we only have 5 minutes left. So I thought I would lob you a fat one for the end here. I said that a few years ago, the New York Times conducted a poll of cultural leaders, and they asked them, could you identify what is the most underrated book you know of, and what is the most overrated book you know of? And by far the best answer came from Bob Dylan, who said that the most underrated book was the Bible, and the most overrated was also the Bible. So with the few minutes we have left here, Charlie, could you at least do that for Irish American? Who's the most underrated book or writer? At least the underrated, and who's the most overrated? That's the one we really want to hear.
Well, I have to go back to Farrell, because we're still, trying to get him the audience he deserves. His books, and particularly, people do know about Studs Lonergan, and it made it into the Library of America. It is my sense that the way that book was embraced, partly because it's the story of a loser, a kind of wishy-washy, undirected kid who stumbles through life and ends up dying at the age of 29 of consumption because of his dissolute living. I have to say that I think that appealed to people who would be who were maybe prone to that.
Yeah. Quick aside. Is it true it was published originally as a sociological text, not as a novel? I've heard that it was.
Not exactly. In order to get it out, Vanguard did. They put on the cover something about sociology, and they had a foreword by a University of Chicago sociologist.
Okay.
Yeah. But then Farrell starts this group of 5 novels in which the hero is Danny O'Neill, who was much more like Farrell himself, a kid from the same neighborhood. It's the South Side Chicago Irish neighborhood around 58th Street and Washington Park, and it's a remarkable achievement. 5 novels, 2,500 pages of fiction, which in my youth I persuaded the University of Illinois Press to republish.
Good man.
And they did. So they're all out there, those 5, and that's where I think people should go. Because he still has not gotten his due.
You're avoiding the most overrated question.
Oh, I could go on. I think maybe the most overrated Irish American book in our time is Angela's Ashes.
Angela's Ashes.
Do you want to know why?
Why would that be, Charlie? Why would that?
Well, I have it on good authority, and that authority actually is sitting in front of me here. That McCourt tried first to peddle that as a novel, and when he couldn't get a publisher for a novel, he repitched it as a memoir, and then then it was acceptable to larger, to the New York-based press and publishing industry and so on.
And it kind of panders to a lot of stereotypes.
Does it ever?
Does
Oh,
it?
yeah. Does it ever?
Well, I would not disagree with you about that, but we don't have time to disagree. We're a half hour up here. Thank you all.
Well done, guys. Thank you. Thank you. So we have one more presentation before we take a break. And when we spoke with Charlie about who we would invite for this weekend, he mentioned the poet Terence Winch. So we wrote to Terence Winch and said, would you please come at this event and read some poems? And he accepted immediately. And Terence Winch, in addition to being this wonderful poet, was a founder of Celtic Thunder, a great Irish-American ensemble from New York and Washington. He's a wonderful musician here as well, but he's here tonight wearing his hat of poet. So please welcome Terence Winch.
Is that mic work? Yeah. Thanks so much, Eamon. It's great to be here, and thank you for inviting me. And to be with Alice, who's not only a dear friend, but I think America's greatest novelist, not just Irish America's. Charlie Fanning is someone I've long admired, going back 40 years or so. But it really goes beyond that. The knowledge and insight that he has brought to the study of Irish American writing has helped create the very idea of Irish America as a concept worthy of scholarly attention. So I know I'm one among many people who feel a tremendous debt to Charlie for the way in which his pioneering vision has played such a central role in the invention of Irish America. And now with his own wonderful new novel, which is available for sale out there, he's not only examining Irish American literature, but creating it as well. So it's an honor to be here to acknowledge the extraordinary life and accomplishments of Charlie Fanning. And I'm going to read a few poems from an older book and then a few poems from the new book, which came out last year. This is a book called Boy Drinkers, and it's very Irish American. People who know me as a loose living pagan don't know that I'm actually the product of 21 consecutive years of Catholic education. From kindergarten through graduate school. And this book reflects a lot of that. So I'll read two poems from this book. The first one is called Comfort. This is kind of high school years. Father Ray Byrne quickly became a star. He played sports, danced, sang, told jokes. He was a man of the people, and we loved him for that. He came to our apartment and brought us comfort. He even came to a high school graduation party one night. I was a little drunk. Father Byrne came up to me and asked, "Are you thinking about it?" I panicked. What did he mean? Sex? Booze? Basketball? Could he read my mind? Then I realized his tone wasn't accusatory, so I said, "Yeah, I'm thinking about it," not having any idea what he was talking about. "That's great," he said. "I can always tell when a young man is thinking about it. Just let me know if I can be of any help." Now I was positive he wasn't talking about sex or money or any of the things I actually did have on my mind. Father Byrne thought I might have a vocation. But I wasn't considering the priesthood. I didn't even think professional basketball was much of a possibility anymore. God had walked out the door about a year before when I was 16 and never looked back, even though I begged him not to leave me alone and weeping in this valley of tears. One thing Charlie and I discovered about each other when we first became friends was that we're both the sons of school custodians. My father was the custodian of St. Thomas Aquinas School, which was right across the street from our building in the Bronx. So this is a poem called Custodian, which is dedicated to Charlie. I ran the shovel along the street, a razor path through the sidewalk face. Snow lather parting for me, for my father, our feet crunching in the city night. We grabbed the garbage cans from school and church and dragged them up the iron stairs. I lugged burlap bags stuffed with bingo cards, light as cream puffs. We swept the auditorium with green sawdust from huge drums. We hammered and drilled in his workshop, where tools hung on pegboard, their image silhouetted behind them for instant identification and placement. Once he sawed his index finger in half on the power saw in a moment of inattention in a life otherwise built of skill and care. Once a year, the Monsignor made him climb inside the giant boiler in the school basement and clean it out with enormous pipe cleaners till he was black with soot that took days to wash off. Sonny boy, he called me, and laddybuck. He always said, just do your best. That's all anyone can expect of you. We loved to watch him fall asleep on the couch, the daily news over his face, snores filling the apartment with the music of life, of rest well-deserved. His finger took years to heal, enough for him to play the banjo again, but had a black scar that ran down its center. He gave me a rub with his unshaven face, rough as sandpaper. He'd pretend he didn't know me, scrubbed clean from the tub. The lovely lie delighting me every time. So I will read a few things from this book, which is called That Ship Has Sailed. Common expression that we hear all the time. It becomes more true the older you get. See, I'm going to have to clean up my language a little bit on this one, I think. This is the title poem, That Ship Has Sailed. In our old life, we ate ice cream and bread pudding. We drank glass after glass of Grand Marnier until it made us sick. Our libido was as big as a billboard. Our libido was larger than a drive-in theater screen in the middle of nowhere playing endless adolescent pornographic classics. We had an appetite for appetite. We poured melted lard all over our popcorn, which we then covered with a snowstorm of salt. We smoked, we snorted, we cavorted with people who were best left alone. We talked all effing night on the phone. We read Keats and Yeats and all the greats, day and night. We got into fights in pubs. We drank 16 cups of coffee every day. We called in sick and spent the days in mysteries, doubts, uncertainties. We shirked our responsibilities without a second thought. We ate Chinese food and pizza for breakfast. We rode the bus to visit friends wherever they might be. We stole books, we cheated, we lied, we cried. We danced all night in the living room around the Christmas tree. In our new life, we try to remember the names of the people we think we might have slept with. We haul bags of frozen broccoli out of the freezer. We light a candle to commemorate crossing the great divide between the green island of the young and the songs in our bones that have come unsung. This is I think this was a COVID poem, but I'm not sure. It might have been before COVID. It's called Fallen World, though, so it kind of fits. You never cry anymore. The trees don't make you weep. The baseball season has almost gone missing, but you really aren't concerned. You can't go anywhere. There's a world of free love, grocery stores, off-track betting shops, and farmers markets, but that world has slipped into another dimension, like when you hang a jacket you got as a kid in your closet and it turns into an old man's coat half a century later. I'm an absentee voter. I'm an absentee drunk. I assault my senses on a daily basis, but nothing can open up the sky again for me and you. No one can tell us we are free to go. We get carry out, we get lonely and scared. No one can open up the past and let it flow right into the present the way it's always done before. Instead, it's stuck back there in the good old days. I blow a kiss to the priests and rabbis. I genuflect to the babies and bathing beauties. We'll see you again soon, I hope, when the trees remember the names of every fallen leaf. This is a poem I dedicated to my brother Jesse. What do we have till 8:15? No, okay. And it's kind of about my parents who were immigrants and who worked very hard and didn't live all that long. So it's called Workaround. My father gets dressed early in the morning. He puts on dark green work pants, work shirt, and old shoes. He has dozens of keys on a key ring for our door, for the door to the school where he works, for the church, the rectory, the convent. He has coffee, bacon and eggs, and toast. His whole life has been nothing but work, day and night, 7 days a week. My mother puts on a full-length slip, what is called a house dress, and comfortable shoes. If it's Thursday, she will wash the sheets and flip the mattresses. Wednesday, she goes to the A&P and wheels home 7 or 8 bags of groceries. Monday, the linoleum gets waxed and polished. She never stops because every day there's an unending amount of work for her to do. Their ship does not come in. They do not wind up on Easy Street. They don't even last long enough to grow old. They get 25 years together, working all the time. They are never unhappy with each other. Sometimes they go dancing in the parish hall. Once they took a trip across the sea. You could sense the depth between them. When they disappear, it's as though the library has burned down with the books only half written. Damon and I were talking about this poem earlier. My father's mother came from the town of Ballyvaughan in County Clare, right in the Burren, and I still have a bunch of cousins there and love going there. And there's a wonderful restaurant that's, I think it mostly is just cake and sweets and that kind of thing and coffee, called Anfear-Gorta, which I thought meant the hungry man, but because of the fada on the E, it's actually the hungry grass, which is an old famine term. So it's a great place. If you're in Ballyvaughan, stop by and have some sweets. So Anfear-Gorta. If I ever go back home again, we will drive through the countryside, just as it's getting dark. We'll gather together in the town's only hotel, eating and telling jokes at each other's expense. My heart beats steady there, my spirit alive to every gesture, every glance, the fire and spark we find in those we love, those to whom we tell our dark secrets along with our idiotic nonsense. Whatever route I take, I always seem to get lost. I have a tendency to choose the wrong road to the wrong place. I wind up confused and stranded, wondering if I'll ever get back home. But I want that ticket back, no matter what the cost. At Anfear-Gorta, I want that rhubarb tart a la mode. I'm even willing to stand in the rain and be reprimanded for the sorry, soggy state in which I've left this poem. I'll read 2 more. This one is kind of an ekphrastic poem in that it comes with a picture of me at almost 3 years old with my leg bleeding. This was taken by my older sisters in the Bronx when I was a kid. I remember, well, actually it's one of my earliest memories, I remember thinking, why are they taking my picture when my leg is bleeding? So this is called You May Take One Giant Step. They told me as the blood ran down my leg how cute I looked in my short pants holding a ball. That was back in the old world, in another century, back when we buried the dead in coffee cans. The sun was silver lemon, not egg yolk yellow, the way it is now. It would burn you so red, your mother could melt butter on your skin. You never learned to throw that ball. You clutched it in your hand and hoped it would never roll away. You were given ginger ale and toast to cut the fever. The mothers all stood on the sidewalk, blowing smoke as the breeze made their skirts quiver. Time was more like background music than an instrument of destruction, ticking in bubble wrap and waiting to go off any second. Everything rhymed in those days. There was a song for vacuuming and an opera for the story of the street. When the moment came to dry your tears and go back inside, the curtain fluttered out the window like a flag of surrender. And then I'll finish up with Jim mentioned Bob Dylan before, and on his last album, you may recall that he has I think it's a 17-minute long sort of song about the JFK assassination. And I loved it, of course. I've probably got a half a dozen poems about JFK and the JFK assassination, which I think anybody my age, our age, remembers very vividly. So this is called JFK Assassinated. I was a freshman in college when he was assassinated. I'm on my way to the car, part of the carpool, going to school, and everybody else is standing in front of the open doors of their cars, bent over, their heads resting on their arms, listening to the news of the assassination. I think we cried. We went to school and prayed and cried. It snowed in April that year. That year, no one had yet committed any sex crimes. No one was a junkie. Only a few of us had already died. This was when men beat their wives and children, when men spent their days digging ditches, drinking quart bottles of Miller High Life, which was cold and golden. You could wear hats back then. You could go out very late at night and walk the streets smoking cigarettes, looking for love. You could stay until the bars closed. You could sit on the stoop, blowing smoke at the sky, wondering what would happen, in the future, which was like a far-off country you would never get to visit, but whose laws you were forced to obey. Thank you.
Eileen, Gannon, and Robert Ryan.
We're going to continue on now with another piece written by Ireland's most prolific, even still to this day, even though he lived in the mid-1600s, Turlough O'Carolan. And he wrote this for another one of his patrons, Mrs. Judge.
So you will probably have noticed that the first movement of that piece, rather stately, presumably for listening, slow dancing, and then The last section is known as the jig. Originally, the word jig comes from the French, and it basically just meant any lively dance music. It didn't really make any difference which meter it was in, and that eventually came to mean a very particular type of dance tune. But at one point, it would have just been any lively music for dancing. So we will finish off this little set with some more dance tunes. We will play some reels, a musical form that we actually stole from Scotland around about the middle of the 18th century, and we haven't looked back.
gift to musicians and what a pleasure it has, and then the thrill it is to have them living here in our midst. So forth. And so now we welcome Alice McDermott to the stage. This is her first visit to St. Louis, she told us today, so we have to give her a big cue. From the bio, she's one of our great American writers. She's won all of the awards and written some of the most marvelous books. So, Alice, welcome.
Thank you, Eamon. Thank you for that warm welcome. What a night. What music. Oh, my goodness. Such a pleasure to be here, and especially to be able to honor Charlie. I'm going to read a section from my latest novel that came out, Halloween. I don't know why. I was hoping for All Saints' Day, but they brought it out on Halloween. But this section actually, I don't know that I thought about Charlie when I was composing it, but I know when I was going through doing the copy editing and everything, it struck me that this section is sort of, my narrator is a first-generation Irish-American. Her parents are immigrants. And in some ways, this section is the Irish becoming American and all the terrible complications that includes. And also, Terence had told me, I knew about Terence's dad being a custodian, and he had mentioned to me one time that Charlie's dad was a custodian, and Tricia, my narrator here's father, is a custodian. The only thing I have to tell you about is that Tricia's friend Stella drives a used Volkswagen Bug that she has christened Feifel, and it means freedom, independence, flight at last.
So he does not.
Because she was from Queens, and because we both bought our clothes at Klein's, I thought when I first met Stella Carney that she was from a working-class family like my own. I was partly right. Her father was a retired fireman, but her mother's family were once wealthy Southerners from New Orleans, as I recall. There was a prestigious writer whose name I have forgotten somewhere in their lineage. Once, in a U.S. history class, Stella announced rather dramatically that while her father's people were Polish, Italian, and Irish immigrants, her mother's were French slave traders. So I've got that to deal with, she said, as if the burden were hers alone. Before the war, the Second World one, Stella's mother had come to New York with her sister Lorraine. Lorraine to study art, Stella's mother, who was once beautiful, to model. I guess she had some mild, limited success, mostly showroom stuff, The story went that when Stella's mother was dumped by a wealthy boyfriend, Lorraine marched her past the nearby firehouse. It was a stifling summer evening on the edges of Greenwich Village. The firemen were sitting outside trying to catch a breeze. The two girls walked past, stopped for an ice cream cone at the corner, and then walked past again. By that time, the young men had had a chance to devise their opening lines. One of them asked, "No ice cream for us?" Not very original, as Aunt Lorraine later told it, but enough to change the trajectory of a life. Although Aunt Lorraine told us this too, her intention had been only to get her heartbroken sister a restorative roll in the hay. For me, Stella's crowded home life was a delight, the kind of busy household I began to imagine for myself in some not far off future. Times Square, she called it. Stella was the second of 6. There was an older brother away in the Marines, and along with her younger siblings, the household contained a tiny Polish great-grandmother, a Polish-Italian grandmother, her daughter, and a grandfather, Pop, who was, he said, straight off the boat from Ireland, although he'd been in the States for 50 years. Stella's room was in the attic of the narrow house, hot as Hades in the summer and full of whistling drafts all winter long, but a place, she said, where at least she could hear herself think. The 4 younger siblings, 2 boys and 2 girls, shared the one large bedroom at the back of the 2nd floor, the room divided by a clothesline hung with beach towels. Her grandparents shared a little room off the same hallway, and her parents had the bedroom at the front. Babka, the great-grandmother, slept in a small nook off the living room, although in many ways the entire first floor was hers. The couches and chairs were covered with her crocheted doilies, her clothes hung in the hall closet, and her nightgowns and underwear, Stella showed me this when I first visited, laughing, were tucked into the drawers of the dining room server, where another family might have kept good silver and the table linens. The 2 grandmas did all the cooking, all day long, it seemed to me, moving slowly around each other in the narrow kitchen and producing pierogies and wedding soup or Irish soda bread, stuffed cabbage, roast, meatballs, cookies, ice layer cakes. Like chefs in some commercial kitchen, they cooked constantly, in no particular order and with no particular meal in mind, just the endless turning out of something good to eat. Stella's father was a quiet guy. What choice? Stella asked. You could tell he might have been good-looking when he was young, still dark-haired and dark-eyed, but bent and shuffling now with chronic back problems. There was an outdoor lounge chair webbed with plaid tape set up in the living room for those days when he could not walk at all. When he was mobile, he spent most of his time with his old father, listening to a ball game or the static of police and fire dispatches on his special radio, either down in the basement or out on the stoop. Other men, mostly friends from his firehouse days, were always stopping by. These were the men who would kid us as we stepped past them on the stairs or met up with them in the kitchen as we reached for something fresh out of the oven. The college girls, they called us, Stella and me, or Mike and Ike, Lucy and Ethel, the Bobbsey twins. Stella's father was always polite, even deferential to us both. On the wall above the dining room server, where Babka kept her clothes, were 6 or so framed citations from his time as a firefighter. Beyond the call thing, Stella said dismissively. Proud, though, I knew. She was equally dismissive of the 2 carefully preserved pages from the Daily News that also hung there. One showed her father in full dress uniform receiving a citation from a white-hatted captain. The fire that ended his career, Stella explained, 2 discs shattered in his lower back. In another front page photo, he was a younger man in full firefighting gear. It was late at night on some city block, and he was holding a barefoot and pajamaed little girl. The girl's arms were around his neck, her face buried in his shoulder, and he was looking seriously at the photographer. "You want to get out of my way," was what Stella said he was thinking. It was clear that smart Stella was the apple of his eye. She was as free with her opinions at the family dinner table as she was in our classrooms at Marymount. But her father never disagreed or contradicted, as mine would have done, only listened and nodded and told the rest of the family, "She has a point." Stella's mother, on the other hand, would shake her head ruefully, interrupting her daughter to say, "Softly, dear," or "There are two sides to everything, Stella," or more passionately, "Why must you be so disagreeable?" Her slight southern drawl, perhaps the most incongruous sound of all in this quintessential Queen's household. No doubt Stella's mother had grown quite plump since her modeling days, but she still had a lovely face and luxurious auburn hair. Even in this small, overpopulated house, there was an air of elegance and detachment about her, a runway posture. Stella complained that she was always cleaning, but I only saw her moving through the rooms in a pretty shirtwaist, waving a soft cloth, an old baby diaper. Over every surface, the lemony smell of furniture polish following her like a dowager's Chanel No. 5. In Stella's attic room, we ate whatever the grandmas had offered and drank ginger ale or iced tea in the summer, hot tea or cocoa in winter, and talked and read and discussed and argued. Khrushchev, Castro, Gary Powers, Dorothy Day or the Dalai Lama, the Greensboro Four or the Mercury 7, the viability of mass protests, the evils of the military-industrial complex, preferential treatment for the poor, the Pope, the church. Oh my, Stella was eager, a hungry mind, and I scurried to keep up. Thanks to George Orwell and Arthur Kessler, Joseph McCarthy, and the radio sermons of Bishop Sheen, as well as the nuns who had taught us most of our lives, we were well versed in those days about the horrors of communism. It was a favorite fantasy of ours up there in Stella's room to imagine what would become of us if the communists won. God eliminated, of course. Statues and crosses banished. Our glorious cathedrals, St. Patrick's even, turned into palaces for the ruling class. Even our humble parish churches and chapels beset by barbed wire and armed guards. We women would have to go to work. Our children, even our infants and newborns, dropped off every morning at some massive brick or concrete government institution. Our aging parents and grandparents sent off as well to desolate warehouses. No sweet babkas squeezed in among your loving family, your daily life, all so that we would be free to take up our duties in office buildings or factories or construction sites. We had seen the photographs of stout and solemn-faced Soviet women in babushkas sweeping Moscow streets. All sense of family obligation erased, so we could go to work. Work being, in this godless world, our only source of happiness, our only reason for being, our sweetness, and our hope. I'm sure it all seems absurd to you now. It does to me. How earnestly we imagine that bleak future, the diabolical disorientation that would transform our innocent lives. Although, recounting it now, it dawns on me that there are 400 old souls in my assisted living facility. No resident under 70. I don't know a single one of my contemporaries who lives with her family. The parochial school where I taught was shuttered years ago. The school I attended as a child is on the verge of bankruptcy, what with declining enrollment and reparations for clerical abuse. The old Brooklyn Cathedral where my parents were married, where I was baptized, is a condominium now, quite pricey. So maybe our dystopian fantasies were not so far-fetched after all. What's the line from Emily Dickinson? While we were fearing it, it came. That's a joke, born of this old lady's nostalgia for a lost world, flawed as it was. In the spring of 1961, our senior year, the Freedom Riders were all in the news. Just before we graduated, Stella learned that some of the Marymount nuns, the ones we most admired, would be in Birmingham all summer, registering voters, advocating for integration, joining arms with those seeking justice long denied. In June, Stella talked me into driving down to join them. She had it all planned. 2 weeks more if things went well. Both of us had part-time summer jobs. Mine was at Klein's on Central Avenue, hers at Macy's in Herald Square, and real jobs that would begin in September. I would teach at a parish school kindergarten in Harlem. She would start as a secretary at the Foundling Hospital in Manhattan. Stella argued that we could juggle our sales clerk schedules with coworkers for at least 2 weeks, and if we decided to stay longer and got fired, so what? Summer jobs were a thing of our teenage past. We would drive down together. Feifel, her car, was up to it, she was certain. Our first overnight would be in Charlottesville, Virginia, where Stella's Aunt Lorraine now lived, married to a professor at the university. A 2-day drive should do it. Knowing my father would worry, knowing even better that he would disapprove. Nobody in this country has it easy, was all my father had to say about civil rights. I told him that Charlottesville was the end point of our excursion. 2 weeks of touring antebellum mansions and hiking in the Blue Ridge, I said, a vacation before I started working full-time. It was an easy enough lie. When Stella pulled up in Feifel early on that overcast morning, my father, as men of his generation were obliged to do, walked me out to the car, carrying my small suitcase. As we approached, I saw Stella suddenly begin to clear the debris from the front passenger seat, tossing more books and papers into the back, as if it had just occurred to her that I would need a place to sit. My father asked me, "She knew you were coming, right?" I said, "I'm not sure." Once I was inside, he leaned down into the opened window. His broad Irish face was freshly shaven. He wore a short-sleeved dress shirt, though he wasn't going anywhere. He was 66 that summer, newly retired. "You girls be careful, please," he said. And Stella smiled. "I will take very good care of her, Mr. Reardon." I knew he was making an effort not to get teary-eyed. Since my mother died, tears came easily to him. "You take care of each other," he told us. He stood on the curb as we pulled away. I looked back, waving. I knew it caused him some pain, this adventure of ours. It caused me some pain, too, thinking of him alone in our house for the 2 weeks I would be away. "He'll be fine," Stella told me. She read me easily. "He'll eat cake for breakfast and walk around in his underwear the whole time you're away. He'll love the freedom." I shook my head. "He'll iron a shirt every morning just to walk down the driveway to get the newspaper. He'll set the table for one and peel 3 potatoes instead of 5 every night for dinner. He'll say pardon if he burps, even with no one there." the high Episcopal refinements of the working class Irish Catholic, Stella said. Don't make fun, I told her, tearful myself. On the floor by my feet was a roll of heavy plastic and a roll of masking tape, provided by her own father and meant to close up the broken passenger side window should we encounter a heavy rain. But by the time we were through New Jersey, the morning clouds were gone. The day was warm and sunny and perfectly June. Stella kept her own window rolled all the way down, and as a result, those back seat scraps of loose leaf paper, notebook paper, candy wrappers, as well as the ruffled pages of her jumbled paperbacks and library books flapped and swirled and rose and fell behind us as we drove, as if the car itself were powered by their roiling dance. I suppose it was this tumult, as well as the rush of the air through the two windows, not to mention the less than purring sound of Feifel's engine, that kept us mostly silent throughout the ride. We were both by then dating the men who would be our husbands. Stella's beau, Robert, never Bob, was a graduate student at the Rockefeller Institute, studying infectious disease, the catalyst for the trajectory of Stella's own peripatetic future, the West Coast, Sweden, Africa. Robert was skinny, serious. He had a dark crew cut, even darker horn-rimmed glasses, not the best teeth. But he was a nice guy in his own distracted way. They had met on the sidewalk on East 70th Street, and when he paused to watch her maneuver Feifel into a parking space that was, she claimed, no bigger than a sleeping cat. When she climbed out of the little car, books bundled in her arms, Robert stepped forward to express his admiration for her skill. I was dating Peter. In just over a year's time, we would both be married women. And yet I don't remember us talking much about our boyfriends on the way to Charlottesville. Maybe it was the noisy car. Maybe it was the momentousness of what we were about to do. We had seen the photos of the burning Greyhound bus, the bloodied faces of the Freedom Riders. We had already decried in Stella's attic Bull Connor, tear gas, martial law in an American city in literature's storied South. Or maybe, is this only historical revisionism? We said so little about the future because we suspected, both of us, that once we were married, we would not know this kind of friendship again. We took only one detour into Washington, D.C., to drive past the monuments. I had been to D.C. before on a high school trip, but on this bright day, it appeared to me to be an exquisite city, sunstruck white and green and somehow golden under a benevolent blue sky, orderly, elegant, clean, and compared to New York, still looking like something newly built. A little surreal in its familiar postcard perfection. Giddily, we stuck our arms out the window as Stella called, "Wave to Mr. Lincoln, wave to Mr. Jefferson, wave to Jack and Jackie, and at the Capitol, wave to the boys under the dome." We thought this tremendously funny, intoxicated as we were with freedom, independence, flight at last. Thank you.
So much, Alice. What an honor and a privilege has been to have you here at our library this evening. And Webster Groves Library Reading Group that Debbie organises just finished reading, right?
I'll talk about tomorrow.
Okay, and they're all here this evening. So if you bought a book and you need to get it signed, the novel Neighbour is outside, and there'll be space there afterwards if you want to sit down and get your book signed. And Holland is still out there. I already thanked all of our co-sponsors for this evening, but our final thank you is everybody for coming out tonight to the library for this event. We appreciate it so much, and we're presenting our culture to you and our heritage and history, and we're proud of it, and we know that we appreciate so much you're coming to hear it. So we're going to, as they say now, send you home with 2 tunes from Robert and Eileen.
We're going to continue with a set of jigs here. The first tune is called End of Day. The second tune is called Cheer Up Old Hag. A great thing to say to anybody who's ever feeling a little bit sad. Works every time. And then the last tune is a tune called Nora Crean. with a set of reels here. First tune is called Father O'Grady's Cricket Bocker. Second tune is called Alice's, and third tune is called A Long Drop. And they're all fairly modern compositions, meaning they've been written in the last 50 years or so at least.